In the ruins of a schoolhouse on Okinawa, where windows hung like broken teeth and chalk dust mingled with ash, Yumi Nakamura waited to be punished for living. She had been taught the script since childhood. If the enemy ever caught you, they would rip away your dignity first, your life second. Americans don't bathe captives. Her instructor had told the class of student nurses. They wash their hands after. So when the gate opened and a U.S. medic waved her forward, she kept her eyes to the ground and prepared to endure. The medic didn't shout. He didn't shove. He simply pointed to a squat wooden shed where steam curled into the gray sky like a secret. Inside, Yumi heard water, gentle and constant, like rain on tatami. A woman's voice, soft, in Japanese, said, "There is soap. There are towels. You are safe." Yumi felt her training splinter. Safe? A hot bath? She had been told the enemy had no mothers, no sisters, no mercy. If the monsters were handing her comfort, what horror waited behind it? She stepped closer, trembling. What else had been a lie? The war found Yumi in a white armband and borrowed courage. She was 18 and small, a student nurse drafted into a role designed to look pure and hurt quietly. On the barracks wall, a poster showed a girl not much older than her, back straight, eyes fierce, marching into a sun that never set. The caption read, "Die before you shame your people." In lectures, their instructor spoke of honor like it was a blade gleaming under every word. "If captured, you do not belong to yourself," he said, tapping the blackboard with a pointer until the chalk cracked. "Your body becomes a weapon in their hands. Do not let them use it." The signal was clear without ever being said. When cornered, end it yourself. Yumi copied the note because everyone did. Her throat felt tight as wire. Rumors moved through the dormitories like wind through bamboo. Someone knew a girl on Saipan who jumped with her family from a cliff to escape capture. Someone else had heard that Americans paraded prisoners through the streets to be laughed at by soldiers. Those stories were sticky. They fit the fear. And fear is contagious. Yumi repeated them in whispers until they felt like memories. Do lies grow warmer each time we pass them from mouth to mouth? At night, she tucked a tiny vial of antiseptic into her sleeve. A talisman she pretended was medicine. In truth, it was a choice. If the day came, she told herself, she would not scream. She would not be dragged. She would vanish, clean and quiet, like breath fading on a mirror. It is easy to promise courage in the dark. The day makes liars of us all. On the morning the bombardment began, iron screamed over the island and the earth bucked as if it wanted to throw the soldiers off its back. Yumi and the other student nurses moved through the school-turned-hospital, a maze of cots and stretched sheets, their hands slick with other people's problems. She learned the weight of blood in gauze. She learned how to say, "It will be all right," while knowing it might not be. She learned that even officers cried, though they did it with their teeth shut and their eyes facing west. When the tide of uniforms turned from familiar gray-green to unfamiliar khaki, panic didn't feel like a wave. It felt like a door slammed shut somewhere inside her chest. The Imperial sergeant who had drilled them stood on a crate and shouted orders over the thunder of distant guns. "No surrender," he barked. "You know what they will do to you." A few of the young women curled their fingers around the necks of their vials like they were beads on a rosary. But the retreat wasn't organized. It staggered, frantic, and then snapped. The officers left first. The loudest ones had somewhere else to be. Yumi watched their backs disappear down the corridor and felt something colder than fear touch her throat. Abandonment squeezes harder than any enemy. Outside, the schoolyard was a battlefield of childhood wreckage. A toppled bell, a seesaw split like a gull's wing, a teacher's desk pocked with shrapnel. Smoke wore the color of rain. Voices approached, steady and layered with a rhythm she had never heard before. English, short commands. No laughter. The nurses huddled behind a wall where geography textbooks were leaking out of a shattered cabinet like wounded birds. A girl named Keiko whispered, "They will hurt us." Another said, "Do not speak. Do not cry. Do not let them see you afraid." But fear makes its own weather. It fogs the mind and beads on the skin. The Americans entered with rifles held low and eyes high, scanning. The first thing Yumi noticed was not their weapons but their faces. Tired, young, smudged. One of them wore a red cross on his helmet, a sign she had been told was a lie. He spoke Japanese with an accent that softened each word like cloth. "Is anyone hurt?" he asked. The nurses did not answer. They waited for the trap inside the kindness, the hook behind the bait. When no punishment came, when the men moved aside to let a gray-haired woman medic step forward, Yumi's breathing stuttered. "Hands visible," the medic said, not unkindly. "Slowly. We will not harm you." She pointed, not to a truck or a holding pen, but to a triangle of canvas where steam bled from the seams. The air smelled like pine and soap. In another life, it would have been a summer memory. In this one, it was a paradox. A second medic lifted a wooden bucket, and Yumi flinched, expecting the splash of filth, the roar of laughter. But when he tipped it, only clean water fell, shining in the light. It hit the dirt and disappeared with a simple sound. "Relief. Sanitation," the gray-haired medic explained, switching back to English beside a young American interpreter who repeated her words in careful Japanese. "For health. For dignity. For all prisoners." Dignity. The interpreter hesitated on the word as if it might burn his tongue. What does a forbidden word do to a forbidden belief? Does it crack it like ice under a heavy foot? Yumi's mind ran through every lesson like a fever dream. The enemy is cruel. The enemy lies. The enemy takes. And yet these strangers had set up a line of canvas stalls, each with a bucket and a folded towel. They had posted another woman at the entrance to hand out soap and guard privacy. They turned their backs to give the nurses space. Yumi felt her training chant for proof of cruelty like a hungry god. It did not come. She looked at her sleeve, at the tiny glass vial hidden there, and felt the weight of it change. It no longer felt like courage. It felt like a tombstone in the wrong place. Behind her, Keiko's voice wobbled. "What if they are pretending?" Pretending is a kind of mercy too, Yumi thought, if it buys us one clean breath. But she did not say that out loud. Instead, she watched a girl even younger than her step toward the canvas, trembling. The gray-haired medic nodded once, as if telling the earth to hold still. The girl went in. Minutes ticked by. No screams, only the hush of water. When the girl emerged, her hair was dark with wet and her face had lost a layer of gray. Her eyes looked dazed, like someone who had found a door where a wall should be. "Hot," she whispered. They warmed the buckets. The word lodged in Yumi like a seed seeking light. Hot. Warmth is a simple thing until you are starved of it. Then it becomes a story that might save your life. Yumi stepped forward. Her hands shook. The interpreter noticed and spoke softly, almost as if he were apologizing for the language in his mouth. "You may take your time," he said. "We will not look. We will not touch." His accent turned touch into something round and harmless. Trust is not born. It sneaks in when the body refuses to stay braced. Can you keep a fist clenched forever? Inside the canvas stall, Yumi found a bucket of steaming water, a small bar of soap with foreign letters stamped into its side, and a towel that smelled faintly of sun. For a moment she did not move. She waited for the knife that must be hiding behind the curtain. When nothing came, she dipped her hands, then her wrists, then, breath held, poured water over her head. Heat slid down her scalp and shoulders, and her whole body made a sound that was not a word. Dust ran from her hair like old belief. The soap left a clean scent that felt like a memory she had been forbidden to keep. As she washed, a sentence floated up from the deep place where the mind stores childhood. "Your enemy is not human," the water answered without speaking. "Human is the name we give to anyone who offers care when they don't have to." When Yumi stepped back into the light, towel around her shoulders, the world had not changed. The sky was still the color of smoke. Men still moved with rifles. But the floor under her certainty had shifted. If the enemy was capable of dignity, what did that make the authority that insisted they weren't? If mercy existed outside the Empire's story, where did that leave the rest of it? The gray-haired medic met Yumi's eyes for a heartbeat, then looked away to give her privacy. That small act, eye contact and then respect, felt like someone opening a window in a room she hadn't realized was locked. Behind Yumi, the line of nurses began to move, each girl carrying a pocket of fear and a new question. The canvas flapped in a tender breeze. Somewhere, someone laughed. A quick, relieved sound, quickly stifled. Hope is shy. It hates being watched. The interpreter cleared his throat, almost embarrassed by his usefulness. After you bathe, he said, there will be tea. And a doctor. Tea. Doctor. Words from a parallel world that had refused to end. Yumi looked at the vial in her sleeve one last time and then, with careful fingers, placed it on a windowsill where the glass caught a stripe of sun. It glowed like a relic no one would worship again. Outside the schoolyard, artillery rumbled like a storm holding its breath. The island still bled. But inside this fence, in this narrow slice of stolen peace, an idea had been wounded more deeply than any soldier. A script had been broken. And once broken, could it ever be read the same way again? No one tells you how silence sounds after your entire belief system cracks. For Yumi, it was not peace. It was waiting. Waiting for the moment the mask would slip. The Americans still felt like actors performing kindness until some cruel reveal would appear from behind the curtain. She kept expecting a shove, a jeer, a punishment for relaxing. Indoctrination doesn't die when truth arrives. It dies when truth stays. They were moved from the courtyard to a makeshift clinic under a half-collapsed roof. Light poured through holes in the ceiling like thin gold spears. She had never seen sunlight look gentle. War usually carves light into weapons. Today it made everything look unreal, like stage scenery that would vanish if she blinked too hard. A soldier set a wooden crate in front of them. Not chains, not restraints, supplies, gauze, salve, blankets. He stepped back, giving them space. Yumi watched his hands. They didn't twitch with threat. They didn't tighten around his rifle. He looked tired and young and bored in the way people are when they are not hunting prey. No script covered this. Their military instructors had rehearsed screams, not courtesy. Keiko leaned close and whispered, "Maybe they're softening us to interrogate later." Yumi almost nodded because fear survives by inventing futures. But another part of her whispered back, "Then why are they feeding us first?" The contradiction flickered inside her like a lamp trying to ignite. The gray-haired medic from before approached again. Her voice had the steadiness of someone who had seen too many wounds and grown brave in the quiet ways. "You are nurses?" she asked. Through the interpreter, yes, but the tone was hers. Respectful, curious, not accusing. Yumi answered before she realized she had. "Student nurses." Her own voice startled her. It was the first time she had spoken to the enemy without spitting fear behind the words. The medic nodded, not triumphant, not amused, professional. "Then you understand wounds," she said. "You understand fatigue. You understand survival. That means we can talk as people, yes? People. Not prisoners. Not trophies." That was a more dangerous kindness than the bath. A younger American medic, maybe 20 at most, examined one of the girls who had shrapnel in her calf. He asked permission before touching her ankle, permission. She stared like no one had ever offered her agency in war before. Maybe no one had. As the interpreter translated, Yumi realized something chilling. Not once had these soldiers referred to them as shameful. Not once had they called them spoils. Not once had they even looked at them like the propaganda promised. If a lie corrodes slowly, a truth corrodes all at once. The Japanese girls sat together on a row of crates. Wrapped in blankets they were afraid to enjoy too much. Most stared at the ground, gripping the last pieces of their indoctrination like driftwood in a flood. One girl muttered prayers. Another tapped her fingers against her arm, still bracing for capture to become cruelty. "They will take us somewhere worse," someone whispered. "After they break us. After they strip our names away." But here was the unsettling part. No one asked for their names at all. Not to erase, but because they valued them as wounded more than as identifiers. In imperial training, identity vanished under rank. Here it vanished under mercy, which is gentler. Which is more devastating? Lunch came in tin bowls, rice, vegetables, broth. Simple. Hot. Steam curled upward like something sacred. The girls didn't eat at first. They waited. Poison was a more believable world than generosity. But after the second minute passed and no meltdown erupted, Keiko took a hesitant sip. Then another. Then her shoulders sagged with the relief of someone who had forgotten food could be swallowed without fear. It wasn't just hunger that thawed, it was doubt. When the Americans stepped aside, giving them privacy while they ate, that was when the crack widened. You cannot dehumanize someone while offering them time, warmth, and space. Yumi felt her throat knot as she swallowed her first spoonful. It tasted like a truth she wasn't ready to admit. But indoctrination is clever. It whispers, this is pity. Pity is humiliation. Humiliation is defeat. Was she being humbled or freed? She didn't know yet. A loud boom rattled the far wall, artillery still thundering the island's edges. The war hadn't disappeared. It was just momentarily, impossibly, not here. And that contrast made the moment feel more unreal than danger ever had. A U.S. officer entered, not with swagger, not with spectacle. He removed his helmet before speaking. The interpreter relayed, "We will be relocating you to a safer holding area. You will not be harmed." Not harmed. The phrase dragged gooseflesh up Yumi's arms. It was too casual, too confident. When someone intends harm, they don't need to announce safety. The girls exchanged glances like small animals unsure if the hunter had lost interest or simply chosen a different angle. Yumi found herself asking a terrifying internal question. What if everything I feared wasn't protection? It was control. What if noble death was just another way to dispose of us before we saw the truth? Her hands began to shake again, but this time not from terror, from internal collapse. The march to relocation was not chains and leashes. It was single-file supervised, but polite. The soldiers kept distance. When one nurse stumbled, a soldier steadied her without gripping her arm, then let go immediately, like helping a stranger cross a wet street. No smirk, no sneer, just function. They were brought to a small ridge overlooking terraced fields, the kind Yumi had only seen on school maps. The war had not erased the Earth's beauty. It only smudged it. Below, temporary tents and medical lines ran like veins through the valley. U.S. medics, orderlies, and clerks moved in quiet efficiency. Efficiency is not cruelty. That realization frightened her almost more than guns. They were given a tent, clean canvas, floor mats, water canteens. Neutrality. Not comfort, not punishment. A nowhere land between worlds. And that is where the second shock hit hardest. No guards inside. No ropes. No shouted rules. Just trust or something shaped like it. Why trust an enemy? Unless the enemy did not see you as enemy first. The indoctrination voice inside her howled. This is a trick. A trap. But her body whispered. Then why does it feel like safety? That night, Yumi couldn't sleep. She sat awake listening to distant thunder and closer breathing. The other girls asleep, finally, without weeping. She touched her hair, still faintly scented with soap. Something inside her chest ached in a slow, unfamiliar way. Not fear. Something adjacent to longing for a world where kindness wasn't treason. Because if the Americans weren't monsters, then who had been lying? And why? Truth does not arrive like lightning. It arrives like a small draft in a sealed room. A draft you could ignore if not for the way it keeps brushing your skin. Outside the tent, dawn crept up behind the war like a trespasser. The island was not done bleeding, but belief had already begun dying. The next morning brought the event that would change everything. Not just for Yumi, but for every girl who still clung to her fear like armor, because the bath was not the end of the illusion. It was only the first cut. By the second morning, the fear should have hardened back into armor. That is how survival usually works. But something different was happening among the girls. They weren't trusting the Americans. Not yet. But they had stopped bracing for the first strike. And once the body stops bracing, the mind begins listening. The order came unexpectedly, soft and almost domestic. The bathhouses have been prepared again. This time, no battlefield urgency. No sok, just an offer repeated. Not a gesture of convenience, a routine. Routine is what destroys propaganda faster than confrontation. Yumi felt her pulse stumble. If it happened once, it could be theater. If twice, it became a pattern. And patterns are harder to explain away than miracles. The canvas stalls had been replaced with sturdier wooden partitions, hurriedly built from salvaged planks. The hot water was plentiful again, heated in dented barrels by enlisted men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere but here, which made it feel even less like a trap. Kindness that looks unromantic is harder to dismiss. One of the American medics, a sandy-haired boy who looked younger than some of the nurses, hauled wood to keep the heat going. He didn't glance at them, didn't stare, didn't smirk. He wiped sweat from his brow and went back for more timber like this was just another task on a list. To him, the bath wasn't charity. It was procedure. And procedure is colder than pity, which somehow made it safer. When it was Yumi's turn again, she stepped into the stall without waiting for courage. The air inside was warmer today, scented faintly with something floral. A cheap soap, probably, but her mind reached for a happier association. Childhood spring festivals, the ones from before the war devoured color. She knelt beside the bucket and paused. Yesterday she had washed quietly, like someone cleaning a borrowed body. Today she touched the water and felt something fierce crack low in her chest. A grief she hadn't known she was carrying. She wasn't grieving loss of home. She wasn't grieving defeat. She was grieving permission. Permission she had never been given by her own army, her own culture, her own state, permission to exist as a human before a symbol. The first tear fell before she knew it. Hotter than the bathwater. Why was it the enemy who gave her back this humanity? Outside, two of the girls whispered, "Is this allowed?" "Not allowed, tolerated." "No. Is this what they call dignity?" The word landed like a contraband jewel between them. Dignity is a dangerous gift. Once given, people begin to ask why it was ever withheld. Inside her stall, Yumi let the hot water trace every bruise she'd ignored for months. As it soaked into her hair, she wondered, had she ever truly bathed for herself during the war? Not rushed, not instructed, not supervised for duty, not as ritual, just to feel clean. If this was defeat, why did it feel like restoration? She dried her face and stepped back out. The world did not lunge. No makeri, no scham, no lesson waiting like a snare. Only steam, and quiet, and breathing. Outside the bath area, a small wooden crate had appeared filled with items wrapped in linen. At first, the nurses assumed it was medical rations. Then the interpreter explained, personal dressings, combs, and sanitary cloth. You may take what you need. The girls froze. The Imperial military had not even issued personal hygiene cloth to them reliably. They were told battlefield purity didn't require comfort. Here, the enemy was supplying what their own government withheld. Keiko whispered the thought no one wanted to voice. Are we more human to them than we were to our own army? The question wasn't meant to wound, but it cut anyway. As they dried their hair in the sunlight, a small procession of wounded American soldiers passed by, being transferred to another tent. None looked at the nurses with hatred. One even nodded, faintly, a soldier acknowledging another caregiver. Equals on opposite sides of a war neither one started. That tiny nod hit Yumi harder than the bath. Respect is the thing indoctrination never prepares you for. Because once you have seen yourself treated as a human, you cannot go back to believing you were born property. That afternoon, the Americans did something else unthinkable. They asked for help. Not orders. Not conscription. A request. The interpreter approached Yumi and 3 others. There are wounded on both sides. They need hands accustomed to care. You understand anatomy. Will you assist? The Empire had only ever demanded. The enemy asked. Yumi's first instinct was panic. Was this service or leverage? Then she realized, no soldier stood blocking her way. She could refuse. They weren't testing obedience. They were offering purpose. Purpose cracks fear faster than comfort. She agreed. Inside the U.S. triage tent, She saw American wounded laid beside captured Japanese troops. The same careful dressings, the same rations, the same respect. Different flags, same pain. War looks smaller when lying down. One American soldier gripped her wrist weakly and rasped, "Thank you." The words struck her ribs like a hammer made of velvet. No Japanese soldier had ever thanked her. Nurses were duty, not dignity. When she stepped back outside, her breath was shaking, but not from fear, from recognition. The propaganda had warned, "They will strip you of honor." But these strangers had done the opposite. They were layering it back on her like warm clothing. The lie wasn't unraveling now. It was collapsing. What happens when the monster turns out not just merciful, but moral? What does that make the empire that told you to die first? That night, she lay awake again. But this time, the fear in her chest was not, "What will they do to me?" It was far more dangerous. What else have I been taught to fear that was never true? The war had not ended around her. But something inside her had. And by dawn, the first whispers of treason, not against a nation, but against a lie, had already begun forming in the dark. Because once kindness becomes consistent, belief must answer for itself. And belief was losing. There is a moment in every captured soldier's mind when the war outside is no longer the battle that matters. The war inside is. And for Yumi, the quiet walk back from the triage tent was the first time she realized she was now fighting a different enemy. Memory. Her instructor's voices still echoed. "They have no mercy." Yesterday, that sentence sounded like a warning. Today, it sounded like a script, not truth performance. The girls did not speak much that evening, but their silence had changed flavor. Yesterday's silence had been suspicion. Today's was thinking. That is far more dangerous to indoctrination than rebellion. Rebelling still means obeying the old rules emotionally. Thinking means leaving them entirely. After sundown, a strange stillness settled over the camp. Not peace, but pause. The Americans rotated guard duty. Someone brewed coffee nearby. The smoke smelled slightly sweet, foreign yet comforting. This wasn't the rattle of a conquering army. It was the rhythm of people trying to restore a world, not unmake one. And that was the fracture. If the enemy wasn't here to terrorize, then why had she been told terror was inevitable? Yumi sat outside the tent, knees drawn to her chest. She looked up and saw stars. Real stars, sharp as glass. Not the blurred ghosts she saw through smoke during bombardments. She realized she had never once looked up during the war. Indoctrination teaches eyes downward. Obedience stares at dirt. "What are you thinking about?" Keiko asked softly beside her. Yumi startled. She didn't have a safe answer, so she spoke the truth before she could edit it. "I don't know who the enemy is anymore." Keiko didn't reply, but the way her breath broke said she wasn't alone. The same night, another crack formed, not in silence, but in memory. Some of the older nurses, those who had served longer, began to tell small, hesitant stories about how harshly their own superiors had treated them. Rations withheld, punishments for exhaustion, humiliation framed as discipline. None had dared call it cruelty before. But now, seeing the contrast, the word surfaced. One girl said, "An officer once told me the army owns my body." Another, "They didn't even let me write to my family during retreat." Another, "If we were so precious, why did they leave us behind?" Ideology shatters fastest when compared side by side with ordinary decency. The next morning, the Americans returned with fresh linens and small medical checks. Pulse, temperature, hydration. Again, routine. Again, consistency. Propaganda cannot compete with consistency. Propaganda is loud once. Reality is quiet every day. That afternoon, an American chaplain came through the camp. He didn't preach. He didn't even mention faith. He just handed out paper and pencils. No demand for loyalty. No oath. Just tools to speak. To choose words again. The interpreter translated simply, "You may write letters home. They will be delivered after processing." Letters. Home. The empire had not even promised to return their names, let alone their words. Yumi didn't write at first. Her hand hovered. What does one say when the world has tilted? "Mother, I am alive. And also everything I believed is burning?" Instead she wrote the smaller truth. "I am being treated kindly. Do not worry." But even that single sentence felt like treason, treason against fear. The real ideological break arrived later that same day, almost by accident. There was commotion near the triage tent. A wounded Japanese auxiliary soldier, delirious with fever, began thrashing. An American corpsman tried to restrain him gently, but the soldier screamed, "Don't touch me, devil! I would rather die than be shamed by you." The interpreter rushed to calm him, but the fevered man kept raging, spitting the lines they were all taught. "You will take my dignity," he cried, kicking weakly. Then something remarkable happened. A U.S. medic stepped back. "Hands up, space given," he said softly. "No one will take anything from you, but we also will not let you die from an infection we can stop. No threat, no mockery, no moral victory speech, just firmness with respect." The soldier blinked, confused. He had no script for an enemy who didn't want to humiliate him. Neither did the nurses. Yumi felt the ground of her identity tilt again. Later that evening, while they folded the spare linens they'd been given, she whispered to Keiko, "What if we were not protecting the homeland, but protecting a story someone needed us to believe?" Keiko swallowed. "If that is true, then who betrayed us first?" That was the thought that spread. Not openly, not aloud, but like a slow ember in dry grass. For the first time, the girls did not sit facing inward, huddled. They sat looking outward, toward the tents, toward the soldiers passing by, toward the world they had been told would devour them. The world was not devouring. The world was simply existing, and inviting them to exist in it, too. And indoctrination cannot survive invitation. Indoctrination only survives cages. That night, a new kind of silence came. Not fear, not thought, reflection. And reflection is the final obstacle before belief breaks. While she lay awake, a realization crept into Yumi slowly, like a tide under a door. If mercy is possible from the enemy, then cruelty was a choice from our own leaders. The next morning, she woke with a sensation she could not name at first. It wasn't happiness, happiness was too large. It wasn't hope, hope was too distant. It was simply unburdened breathing. The first breath in years not shaped by obedience. She would later look back and call this moment the first betrayal of fear. Because fear can only own you while it remains unquestioned. Once questioned, it bleeds. The belief hadn't toppled yet, but it was cracking like an eggshell under a slow, relentless hand. And the moment that would shatter it entirely, the one no one could prepare for, was already on its way. Not from force, not from surrender, but from realization. Because next came the moment that forced Yumi, and every girl with her, to confront a truth worse than terror. The Americans did not treat them as spoils, but as women. Not defeated symbols. Not disposable bodies. Humans first, captives second. And if humanity lived here, what had they been living under before? The answer was coming, and it would not arrive gently. The moment of break didn't come with shouting or confrontation. It came with choice. And choice is something prisoners are never meant to feel. On the fourth day, U.S. medics arrived with folded garments. Not uniforms, not prison rags, but modest dresses and tunics sewn from spare cloth. Civilian clothing. Clothing with softness. Clothing not designed to erase identity but to return it. When the first bundle was placed before Yumi, her hands trembled. No one said, "You must wear this." They didn't strip symbols away. They invited her to step out of them. An officer explained through the interpreter, "You are non-combatants now. You are not soldiers. You deserve clean clothing." It sounded ordinary, but to girls trained in the imperial mindset, this was seismic. The enemy had given them back their womanhood before their homeland ever had. She retreated behind the canvas stall to change. When she slipped out of the tattered uniform and put on the soft garment, she froze. Felt like her shoulders could finally drop. Like she had been wearing someone else's life for months and had only now returned to her own. She looked at her reflection in a small shard of metal someone had propped against a crate. Her face, thinner, bruised with exhaustion, but recognizable. Not a tool, not a symbol, not a soldier. Person. The uniform lying at her feet looked suddenly enormous, like a skin she had outgrown. Outside, some of the other girls wept quietly as they changed. Not from sadness, from the shock of remembering they had once existed before duty. When they stepped from the stalls, wrapped in fabric that didn't carry orders stitched into its seams, they looked like people again. Daughters, sisters, girls, not instruments. The American interpreter lowered his eyes politely, then said something so simple that it nearly undid Yumi completely. You look safe now. Not clean. Not obedient. Not processed. Safe. The Empire had never promised safety. Only sacrifice. That afternoon, the ideological collapse finally completed. A wounded Japanese soldier, one of their own, was brought into the camp. He recognized the nurses and sneered. Traitors, he spat. You bathed like animals. You let them touch you. You have already shamed your country. The old script. The same script that nearly drove them to suicide days earlier. But this time something stunning happened. For the first time, Yumi didn't believe him. Her pulse still raced, but not with submission, with clarity. The American medic stepped back to give the women space, trusting them to answer for themselves. And Yumi did, not with defiance, but with quiet certainty. We are alive, she said. And alive is not shame. The wounded soldier glared, speechless. He had no doctrine prepared for survival that did not kneel before death. This was the moment the indoctrination broke completely. She no longer feared disappointing the idea of Japan more than she valued her own beating heart. When the soldier was carried away, the girls didn't look at each other in shock. They looked at each other in recognition, as if seeing, maybe for the first time, that shame had always been a leash, and kindness was a pair of scissors. Later that evening, one of the American medics, the young one, asked the interpreter a question the girls would never forget. Are they nurses or hostages in their own country? The interpreter hesitated, eyes heavy. He didn't translate the words out loud. He just looked at Yumi as if he knew she already understood. Because she did. That night, the camp lanterns glowed like floating stars, and the girls sat in stillness. Not fearful silence, not stunned silence, becoming silence. The kind that follows revelation. The world outside was still burning, but inside this small captured space, an unthinkable truth had rooted. Humanity is not weakness. Humanity is power. A power that breaks chains without clanging. A power that overthrows indoctrination without firing a shot. A power that rewrites enemies into mirrors. Days later, when they were transported to a formal POW center with bedding, schedules, medical checkups, and fair rations, Yumi did not feel captured. She felt witnessed. Some of those young women would later return home after the war and quietly, carefully, become the first generation of Japanese women to question the roles they had been given. Not loudly, not politically, but spiritually at the deepest layer of self. Some became nurses not for duty, but by choice. Some became teachers. Some refused to let their daughters grow up believing obedience was virtue. Some later admitted that the bath, that simple, steaming, unthreatening bath, was the moment they realized the state had lied more brutally than the enemy ever could. Years later, historians would call this soft collapse doctrine. The moment faith in the militarist myth dissolved not under invasion, but under evidence of an alternative. The empire expected bullets to break the enemy. It never expected empathy to break them. Yumi would live long enough to understand that the war did not end the day she survived. The war ended the day she saw herself differently. Not as sacrifice, not as resource, not as currency for honor, as a life. And no empire, not American, not Japanese, not any, can ever fully control someone who has learned to recognize her own life as belonging to herself. Because the strongest revolution is not fought on a battlefield. It is fought inside a single private realization. I was always human. Some victories are not written in blood, but in awakening, the quiet kind that no report ever counts. If you want more forgotten moments where mercy rewrote history and belief surrendered before gunfire did, stay with this channel. The next story waits just beyond this one.